Hello everyone, and welcome back to my channel. Today we're going to be looking at what I've been eating lately and going over some dinner meals that I've had. These meals are really inspired by just whatever I had in the fridge and also what's been coming into season in the garden. So I was able to harvest my potatoes and some collard greens and of course lots of tomatoes. This first recipe is for a classic lasagna, which also happens to be gluten-free because it's with brown rice noodles, which have really nice texture actually. And I'm gonna start by making a tofu ricotta, which if you've seen any of my other videos, you might be familiar with. So I just start by making a roux with some oil and some potato starch, and then slowly add in the milk, nutritional yeast, and some mustard and salt and pepper for seasoning, and then crumble in the tofu. Always taste as you're making things and season it to your preference. One of the important components of this lasagna is going to be a garlic and herb oil. So I'm going to chop some garlic and add in a bit of oregano and basil, as well as some red pepper flakes if you like a little spice. And from cold, we're going to just bring that up to a low simmer and leave it until the garlic starts to get a little golden. The most fun part about making lasagna is adding all of the layers. So I start with a bit of that oil before adding in the ricotta, followed by the sheets of pasta, red sauce, a bit more oil, and some vegan mozzarella. I'd love to know in the comments, or if you'd like to message me on Instagram, if you guys would be interested in some sort of pantry tour or interested in learning more about what kind of vegan cheese alternatives that I like to use. The first time I made this, I was honestly so impressed, like how cheesy it tasted, and this recipe's really made it into the regular rotation just because it's so comforting and filling. And we like to joke that it's another form of rice and beans because of the brown rice noodles and the soy tofu. Up next, I'm going to be using some potatoes from my garden, which I grew from little scraps from grocery store potatoes. So I thought that was just a really cool process, and this recipe is basically just like some nuggets and potatoes, which is honestly one of my ideal dinners. So I kept the potatoes really simple, just seasoned with some herbs, nutritional yeast, and a bit of salt and pepper. The secret to making really good tofu nuggets is freezing the firm tofu before you use it. This makes the texture so much better and opens up those pores so you can marinate it and get whatever seasoning you want in there. The potatoes and the tofu take a bit of time to bake, so it's the perfect opportunity to get those dishes done. It's not my favorite task, but I try to just think about how nice it's gonna look in the end. The sauce I'm using for the wings is a sweet and spicy mustard, so kind of like honey mustard with a bit of buffalo sauce in there. Once the tofu looks a little bit golden on some sides, I add a bit more oil and then pop it back in the oven to get nice and crispy. At this point, I added a little bit of sauce and then cooked that for an additional 10 minutes in the oven to help the tofu soak it up. By then, our potatoes were nice and roasted, and I made a little bit additional sauce to toss the tofu in when it came out of the oven. As someone who's been learning on a long journey to love veggies, sometimes it's nice to just have a protein and a carb. This year was my first year growing collard greens, and I have to admit my experience with them is super limited, and trying them from the garden was actually the first time I cooked with them or have tasted them. What I do know about this lovely veggie is that it is a staple in Southern soul food. This first recipe is for a really simple cornbread, and I'm mixing equal parts masa and white flour. And if you'd like the measurements for these recipes, they're going to be left in the description below. To make a buttermilk substitute, I'm adding some coconut milk as well as a squeeze of lemon. And to substitute eggs in the recipe, I'm making some flax eggs, which is 3 tablespoons of the flax and 3 tablespoons of water. Honey is also a key ingredient in cornbread, so to replace that and keep it vegan, I'm just using agave, which I use a little less of because it is very sweet. While you're mixing the batter, you can preheat the oven and stick a cast iron pan in there. I'm using an 8-inch cast iron. And then when it's hot, you can take it out and coat it with some coconut oil or vegan butter so the batter doesn't stick. And then you're going to pour it straight in, and it's going to go right back in the oven. While the cornbread was baking, I chopped some onions for these barbecue beans that I'm making. And I'm making a homemade barbecue sauce with onion, tomato paste, a little agave, cayenne, smoked paprika, and a little bit of cloves. Usually I also add molasses, but you can also substitute with a little bit of soy sauce. When you can poke the cornbread with a toothpick and it comes out clean, you can take it out of the oven. I prep the collard greens by washing them and removing the stems before rolling them up and slicing them into nice ribbons. For the barbecue beans, I'm using some white beans, and I'm just going to give those a good rinse before adding them to the sauce. In a pan, preferably one bigger than the one I'm using, you can add the onions and the collard greens. And once the onions have become caramelized, I add a half a bouillon cube and about 3 tablespoons of water. As those cooked, I seasoned with a little bit of black pepper, turmeric, and some smoked paprika, and optionally you can add cayenne as well. The cornbread turned out really moist and delicate, and it was really nice paired with the smoky and spicy beans. I was also really happy with how the collard greens turned out. I have lots more in the garden, so I would love to know in the comments if you guys have any ideas for what I could make. This recipe is inspired by an indigenous growing practice called the Three Sisters Garden. The Three Sisters refers to corn, squash, and beans, which benefit from being grown together and also utilize all of the space in the garden. This has been my second year gardening, and I've been really interested in learning more about regenerative agriculture and permaculture. And having learned more about those things, I've really realized that a lot of the principles about interconnectedness, using what you have, and building resiliency through cooperation with the land is really based in Indigenous knowledge. Realizing this, it was a good reminder for myself that as we're building better relationships with the land and with ourselves and with our food, it's important that we center the voices of people who've been doing this for thousands of years. We have a lot to learn from Indigenous communities and communities that are most deeply impacted by climate change. And if you're interested in learning more, I'm gonna leave some links down in the description. A love of good food is something most of us have in common, and it's just a beautiful way to connect with each other and share our stories. I had harvested some eggplant before vacation and came home to some very sad looking eggplants at the bottom of my fridge. I was inspired by those sad eggplants and my desire to not have to do any additional dishes to make this one pan pasta dish. I started by roasting some cherry tomatoes and the eggplant in the oven. This recipe is based on an Italian dish called pasta alla norma. Usually it's made with sausage, so today I'm going to be making a walnut meat crumble. So I add a not beef bouillon cube and a bit of nutritional yeast to the blender with the walnuts that I've been soaking in hot water. The walnut crumb is going to go in a pan with a box of pasta and 5 cups of pasta sauce. Instead of foil, I like to cover it with a big cooking pan, and about halfway through, you're gonna give it a nice stir and top it with some vegan mozzarella cheese. I finished it off with a bit of red pepper flakes and stirred it up so it got nice and creamy. Thank you all for watching, and I hope you enjoyed today's video.